The air shimmered with an almost tangible opulence in Mrs. Albright's grand mansion, nestled in the exclusive enclaves of Greenwich, Connecticut. Tonight, the sprawling estate was alive with the hushed murmur of high society, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the soft strains of a live string quartet. It was Mrs. Albright's annual charity gala, an event meticulously crafted to solidify her standing at the pinnacle of the town's social hierarchy. Women glided through the gilded rooms in gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries, their necks adorned with diamonds that sparkled under the soft glow of antique chandeliers. Men in bespoke suits discussed stock portfolios and philanthropic endeavors with equal gravitas, their voices modulated to a tone of cultivated nonchalance. Every detail, from the hand-painted canapés to the rare orchid centerpieces, screamed exclusivity, a silent testament to Mrs. Albright's impeccable taste and boundless wealth. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, aged whiskey, and the subtle aroma of superiority. Amidst this spectacle of extravagance, Maria, a kind and hard-working maid, moved with practiced efficiency. She navigated the crowded rooms, offering trays of champagne and clearing empty flutes, her presence as discreet as possible. Maria was a fixture in many of Greenwich's most prominent households, known for her quiet diligence and unwavering reliability. Tonight, however, her usual calm was tinged with a slight anxiety. Her daughter, Elena, a bright-eyed girl of about 10, was with her. Maria had been unable to find a sitter at the last minute, a common struggle for a single mother working long hours. Elena, dressed in her best, a simple but neatly pressed floral dress, tried her utmost to be inconspicuous. She clung close to her mother, her small hands clasped behind her back, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and curiosity as she took in the dazzling display around her. She was a well-behaved child, taught by her mother to be respectful and mindful of her surroundings, especially when in others' homes. Yet, the sheer grandeur of the party was a magnet for her young imagination. As Maria momentarily stepped away to the kitchen, Elena found herself near a group of guests, her gaze drawn to Mrs. Albright herself. The hostess, a statuesque woman with an imperious air and a perfectly coiffed blonde bob, was holding court, a dazzling smile fixed on her face as she gestured grandly with a diamond-encrusted hand. Elena, remembering her mother's constant lessons about politeness and respect, felt a small surge of courage. She believed it was only proper to introduce herself to her mother's employer, especially since she was a guest in her home, however temporary. Taking a deep breath, she approached Mrs. Albright with a quiet confidence that belied her age. Extending her small, clean hand, Elena looked up at the towering woman, and in a clear, sweet voice, said, "Hello, Mrs. Albright. My name is Elena." Mrs. Albright paused her animated conversation, her smile faltering as her eyes flickered down to the outstretched hand. Her gaze then drifted past Elena to where Maria was just returning from the kitchen, a look of unmistakable disdain settling on her perfectly made-up face. A subtle wrinkle appeared between her brows. A silent judgment passed. She looked at Elena's hand, then at Maria, then back at Elena, as if contemplating an unpleasant insect. Without a word, without the slightest acknowledgement of the child or her polite gesture, Mrs. Albright simply turned her back. She resumed her conversation with the nearest guest, her voice regaining its earlier vivacity, completely dismissing Elena as if she were an invisible fixture in the room. The small, hopeful hand remained suspended in the air for a moment, then slowly, sadly, retreated. Maria, her heart sinking, had witnessed the entire, humiliating exchange. Her face, usually composed, crumpled with a mixture of hurt and anger. She quickly moved to Elena's side, gently taking her hand and pulling her away from the bustling crowd. "Don't you mind her, mija," Maria whispered, her voice thick with emotion, as she knelt to Elena's level. "She doesn't know any better." Elena, her eyes now clouded with confusion and a deep, childish hurt, looked up at her mother, unable to comprehend the cruel rejection. Why wouldn't the lady shake her hand? Had she done something wrong? The vibrant sounds of the party now seemed to mock her, amplifying her small, private pain. Unbeknownst to Mrs. Albright, her callous act had not gone unobserved. From a discreet corner of the opulent ballroom, a man named Mr. Rosie watched the entire scene unfold. He was a formidable presence, quiet and impeccably dressed, a guest of honor whose reputation preceded him. People spoke of Mr. Rosie in hushed tones, acknowledging his immense wealth and influence, often hinting at connections that ran deeper than mere business. He was a man of few words, his face an unreadable mask, yet his eyes missed nothing. As Mrs. Albright turned her back on Elena, a flicker of something unidentifiable passed through Mr. Rossie's dark gaze. He didn't react, didn't show any outward emotion, but his eyes, sharp and intense, remained fixed on Mrs. Albright as she continued her social charade. The party swelled around them, a symphony of oblivious revelry, but the tension born from that brief, cruel moment hung heavy in the air, a silent promise of consequences yet to unfold. Elena looked sad. Maria tried to make her feel better, and Mr. Rossie's silent, watchful gaze became a potent, unacknowledged force in the room. Mrs. Albright's world was a meticulously curated tapestry, woven from generations of inherited wealth and unquestioned privilege. She was a product of old money, a lineage that traced its roots back to colonial governors and industrial titans. From the moment she drew her first breath in a gilded crib, she had been shielded from the harsh realities that governed the lives of most people. The concept of earning one's keep was an alien notion, a vulgar necessity for those less fortunate. Her parents, pillars of their exclusive community, had meticulously instilled in her a profound sense of superiority, a belief that class distinctions were not merely social constructs, but immutable laws of nature. Service staff, maids, gardeners, chauffeurs, were not individuals with lives and feelings, but rather extensions of the household machinery, existing solely to cater to the needs of their betters. She had been taught that acknowledging them beyond a perfunctory instruction was a breach of etiquette, an unnecessary fraternization that blurred essential lines. This ingrained philosophy manifested in her every interaction, a default setting of disdain for anyone who wasn't part of her rarefied social stratum. Her snobbery wasn't a conscious choice. It was the very air she breathed, as natural and essential to her being as the designer clothes she wore. She had never known struggle, never encountered a closed door, and therefore possessed no capacity to empathize with those who did. In stark contrast, Maria's journey through life had been a testament to resilience and unwavering resolve. She had immigrated from a small, sun-drenched village nestled in the Italian countryside many years ago, carrying little more than hope and the fierce determination to forge a better life. The journey itself had been fraught with challenges, each step a testament to her courage. In America, she had faced the daunting reality of a new language, a new culture, and the relentless grind of low-wage labor. A single mother, she juggled multiple jobs, often working from dawn until late into the night, her hands calloused, her back aching, all to provide for Elena. Maria understood the true meaning of hard work, the dignity it bestowed, and the sacrifices it demanded. Her values were deeply rooted in respect, kindness, and the unwavering belief that every individual, regardless of their station, deserved to be treated with dignity. She instilled these principles in Elena, teaching her that character and integrity far outweighed material possessions or social standing. Maria's greatest dream was to see Elena transcend the limitations that had defined her own life, to have opportunities she could only have imagined. Every scrubbed floor, every polished surface, every late night was a brick laid in the foundation of Elena's future, a future she envisioned as bright and boundless. Mr. Rossi, the enigmatic observer of Mrs. Albright's casual cruelty, hailed from a world far removed from Greenwich's manicured lawns and opulent mansions. He had grown up in the unforgiving streets of New York City, a crucible where respect was not inherited, but earned through grit, cunning, and an unyielding loyalty to one's own. His empire, vast and influential, had been built brick by painstaking brick, from nothing but sheer force of will and an acute understanding of human nature. He had clawed his way to the top, navigating treacherous currents where a handshake meant everything, and a slight could have dire consequences. This upbringing had forged in him a strong, almost primal sense of loyalty to his community, and a profound respect for those who toiled honestly to make their way in the world. He harbored a quiet disdain for arrogance, particularly when it was directed at the vulnerable. Beneath his formidable exterior, Mr. Rossi possessed a surprising soft spot for children, viewing them as innocent vessels deserving of protection and guidance. He believed, with unwavering conviction, that basic human respect was a universal right, a fundamental courtesy that transcended social strata, wealth, or power. While the whispers of his connections often alluded to a darker, more organized influence, his core philosophy remained steadfast. Treat others as you wish to be treated, and never forget where you came from. Elena, blossoming under her mother's loving care, was an exceptionally bright and intelligent girl. Her mind was a sponge, soaking up knowledge with an insatiable curiosity. She devoured books, her imagination ignited by the worlds contained within their pages. Her dreams were as expansive as the sky, fueled by the desire to make her mother proud and to create a life of purpose. She envisioned herself as a doctor, healing the sick, or a teacher, igniting the same passion for learning in others. She was acutely aware of her mother's relentless struggles, the lines of fatigue etched around Maria's eyes, the quiet sacrifices made daily. This awareness instilled in Elena a fierce determination to excel, to seize every opportunity, and to honor her mother's unwavering love through her own achievements. The stark contrast between these two worlds, Mrs. Albright's insulated bubble of inherited grandeur, and Maria and Elena's humble reality, built on hard work and sacrifice, was profound. Their paths, destined to remain separate in the grand scheme of society, had briefly and unexpectedly intersected within the gilded confines of Mrs. Albright's mansion. That single, fleeting moment, the innocent extension of a child's hand, and its cold, unfeeling rejection, had set the stage. It was a clash of values, a collision of privilege and principle, destined to reverberate far beyond the confines of the opulent gala, a tiny spark igniting a chain of events that would ultimately challenge the very foundations of Mrs. Albright's carefully constructed world. The tension from that small moment, observed by the silent, watchful gaze of Mr. Rossi, was a precursor to the storm that was gathering on the horizon. Mrs. Albright, ensconced in her world of inherited privilege and meticulously maintained appearances, remained utterly oblivious to the ripples her actions had sent through the lives of others. The incident with Elena at the gala faded into the background of her consciousness, dismissed as an insignificant encounter with the help's child. It was merely a fleeting annoyance, quickly overshadowed by the more pressing matters of her social calendar, her next charity committee meeting, or the selection of new draperies for her summer home in the Hamptons. Her life continued its luxurious trajectory, punctuated by luncheons, shopping excursions, and art auctions. The idea that her brief, dismissive gesture could have any lasting impact was beyond her comprehension. For Mrs. Albright, the service staff were interchangeable, faceless entities whose sole purpose was to ensure her comfort and convenience. She rarely bothered to learn their names, often referring to them by their roles: the gardener, the driver, the maid. Her demands were absolute, her expectations often unreasonable, yet she saw no fault in this. It was simply the prerogative of her position, a natural order of things. Her snobbery wasn't a malicious, calculated act, but rather an ingrained, almost unconscious reflex, a default setting that governed all her interactions with those she deemed beneath her social standing. It was an entitlement so deeply woven into the fabric of her being that she couldn't perceive it as a flaw, let alone a source of offense. Meanwhile, Maria, with her quiet strength and boundless love, worked tirelessly to mend the small wound inflicted upon Elena's spirit. "Some people, Mija," she would explain softly, stroking Elena's hair, "are just lost in their own world. Their behavior says more about them than it does about you. You are kind, you are smart, and you are loved. That is what truly matters." Elena, though still carrying a wisp of confusion and hurt, found solace in her mother's unwavering reassurance. She was a resilient child, and the incident, rather than breaking her spirit, seemed to strengthen her resolve. She channeled her energy into her studies, excelling in school, her grades a testament to her sharp mind and diligent effort. Maria's unwavering support was the bedrock upon which Elena built her confidence. Despite their daily struggles and the constant pressure of making ends meet, they found profound joy in small, shared moments. A quiet evening reading together, a walk in the park on Maria's rare day off, the simple warmth of their shared laughter over a home-cooked meal. These were the moments that fortified their bond and reminded them that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in love, family, and inner strength. Elena's dreams, far from being diminished, grew clearer and more vibrant, fueled by her desire to honor her mother's sacrifices. In the shadows of Greenwich's glittering social scene, Mr. Rosie operated with the quiet efficiency of a master chess player. He was a man of few words, his presence often more felt than seen, yet his influence permeated every corner of his vast network. People sought his counsel, not just for business acumen, but for his reputation as a fair, albeit unyielding arbiter of justice. His word was law in certain circles, his decisions final. He valued integrity above all else, and he harbored a particular disdain for arrogance, especially when it was directed at the vulnerable. The image of Mrs. Albright's dismissive turn, the small, innocent hand left hanging in the air, had lodged itself firmly in his memory. It wasn't just a minor social gaffe. To Mr. Rossi, it was a profound breach of human decency, a stark display of contempt for another human being, particularly a child. This single incident, seemingly trivial to Mrs. Albright, resonated deeply with his own upbringing and his core principles. The seed of discontent, planted by Mrs. Albright's actions at the gala, began to sprout. Mr. Rossi, discreetly and without drawing any attention to himself, began to make subtle inquiries about Mrs. Albright. His vast network, a web of contacts spanning various industries and social strata, provided him with an unfiltered view into her world. He learned of her reputation, not just among her staff, but also among business associates. Her snobbery wasn't confined to her personal life. It often spilled over into her professional dealings. She was known for her condescension, her dismissive attitude towards anyone she deemed not up to her standard, whether they were junior executives or potential partners from less prestigious backgrounds. These reports only served to reinforce his initial impression, solidifying his conviction that Mrs. Albright's arrogance was not an isolated flaw, but a deeply ingrained aspect of her character, a dangerous liability in his estimation. He saw a pattern of behavior that lacked not just empathy, but fundamental respect for others. Driven by his quiet sense of justice, Mr. Rosie decided to act, though his actions were as subtle and indirect as his inquiries. Without ever revealing his hand, he orchestrated a small, anonymous act of kindness for Maria and Elena. Through one of his trusted contacts in the philanthropic sector, he quietly ensured that Maria was offered a cleaner, more stable, and better-paying housekeeping position with a reputable family known for their fair treatment of staff. The offer came without explanation, a stroke of good fortune that Maria gratefully accepted, easing some of the financial burden she carried. Simultaneously, he made sure a promising, anonymous scholarship opportunity for gifted young students, specifically tailored to Elena's academic profile, found its way to her school counselor. This wasn't a direct intervention, but rather a gentle nudge from the unseen hand of influence, designed to open doors for those who deserved them, and to subtly demonstrate his commitment to justice without ever seeking credit. These small, seemingly unrelated events were a testament to Mr. Rossi's character and his unwavering belief that everyone deserved a fair chance, and that respect, once earned, was a currency more valuable than any fortune. He was a man who understood that true power lay not in overt displays, but in the quiet, decisive orchestration of events, ensuring that justice, in its own time and in its own way, would prevail. Mrs. Albright, ever immersed in her gilded bubble of self-importance, was now focused on a new endeavor, a project she believed would cement her legacy and elevate her social standing even further. It was a grand vision, a new exclusive members-only club, or perhaps a sprawling high-end residential development, destined to become the epitome of luxury in Greenwich. This was not merely a business venture. It was a personal crusade, a testament to her impeccable taste and her unparalleled connections. Securing the necessary investment and partnerships for this grandiose scheme was paramount, not just for financial gain, but for the intangible currency of prestige and influence it would bring. She moved through her days with a renewed sense of purpose, convinced that this project would be her crowning achievement, a monument to her unassailable position at the apex of society. What Mrs. Albright didn't know, couldn't possibly fathom, was that the very currents she navigated were subtly, almost imperceptibly, being influenced by an unseen hand. Mr. Rossi, the quiet observer from the gala, was not merely an influential figure in the abstract. He was a key player, or intimately connected to key figures, involved in the very deal Mrs. Albright was so assiduously pursuing. He might have been a silent investor himself, a powerful voice on the board of a holding company, or a close confidant to the primary venture capitalists Mrs. Albright was trying to court. His network, far-reaching and deeply entrenched, meant that no significant financial undertaking in this sphere could proceed without his tacit approval, or at the very least, his awareness. Mrs. Albright, with her myopic focus on her own importance, remained blissfully unaware that her destiny in this particular venture was inextricably linked to the man whose silent disapproval she had earned. The stage was set for a crucial gathering. Mrs. Albright orchestrated a lavish cocktail reception, or perhaps an intimate dinner at an exclusive venue, designed to impress the potential investors. She moved through the room with practiced grace, a dazzling smile fixed on her face, regaling guests with anecdotes of her charitable endeavors and the visionary scope of her project. Mr. Rossi was present, as he often was at such high-stakes events, a silent, almost spectral presence. He rarely engaged in extended conversations, preferring to observe, to listen, to gauge the true measure of those around him. Mrs. Albright, in her element, felt emboldened, perhaps a little too comfortable. During a conversation with a small group of influential men, she once again let slip a dismissive comment, a casual remark about the challenges of managing staff these days, or the sheer inefficiency of people who don't understand true quality. Her words, veiled in a veneer of sophisticated complaint, carried the familiar undertone of condescension, a subtle yet unmistakable disdain for anyone outside her immediate, privileged circle. Her eyes, however, never met Mr. Rossi's, who stood a little distance away, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, his gaze unwavering. Mr. Rossi had seen enough. He had heard enough. The incident with Elena, the subsequent reports from his network about Mrs. Albright's consistent pattern of behavior, and now, this casual display of arrogance in a professional setting. For him, it wasn't just a matter of personal offense. It was a matter of principle, and crucially, a matter of business. He believed that integrity and respect were not just moral virtues, but essential components of a stable and trustworthy enterprise. Someone who displayed such a profound lack of basic human decency, who treated others with such casual contempt, was a liability. Such a person lacked the judgment, the empathy, and the foresight necessary to navigate complex business relationships. He made a quiet decision. The deal, Mrs. Albright's grand project, would not move forward with his involvement, nor with the involvement of anyone he could influence. It was a silent decree, issued not with a shout, but with a simple, internal resolution. Almost immediately, the first tremors of consequence began to shake Mrs. Albright's meticulously constructed world. The vibrant enthusiasm surrounding her project began to wane. Meetings were postponed, then canceled. Key investors, who had previously shown keen interest, suddenly became elusive, their responses vague and non-committal. The initial excitement gave way to a chilling silence. Mrs. Albright, unaccustomed to such setbacks, found herself increasingly confused and frustrated. She convened emergency meetings with her legal team, her financial advisors, her public relations consultants. She blamed market fluctuations, unforeseen regulatory hurdles, even the fickle nature of high finance. She analyzed every aspect of her proposal, convinced that there must be a flaw in the projections, a miscalculation in the market analysis. She never once considered that the problem might lie not in the numbers, or the market, or external factors, but in her own behavior, her own ingrained arrogance. The thought that a seemingly insignificant encounter with a maid's daughter could be the genesis of her current predicament was utterly alien to her, an impossibility in her privileged universe. The walls of her bubble, however, were beginning to crack, and the cold reality of consequences was about to seep in. The following morning, as Mrs. Albright was sipping her artisanal coffee, perusing the financial section of the New York Times, her antique rotary phone, a relic she kept for its aesthetic charm, rang with an unexpected urgency. Her personal assistant, usually a gatekeeper of utmost discretion, connected the call with a tone of unusual deference. "Mrs. Albright?" The assistant's voice quivered slightly. "Mr. Rossi's office is on the line. He wishes to speak with you." Mrs. Albright frowned. Mr. Rossi was a name she recognized, a powerful figure whose presence at high society events was noted, but with whom she had no direct dealings. The call was curt, devoid of pleasantries. A deep, resonant voice, not Mr. Rossi's, but clearly from his inner circle, stated simply, "Mr. Rossi would like to meet with you this afternoon. 2 o'clock, at the Sterling Club. He expects you." It wasn't a request. It was an instruction, delivered with an understated authority that brooked no refusal. Mrs. Albright, unaccustomed to such directness, felt a prickle of annoyance mixed with a strange sense of unease. The Sterling Club was one of the most exclusive establishments in the city, a place where deals worth billions were quietly forged. The sudden invitation, coupled with the abrupt tone, was intriguing and a little unnerving. Promptly, at 2 o'clock, Mrs. Albright arrived at the Sterling Club, impeccably dressed, her composure a shield against the growing apprehension she felt. She was led to a secluded, opulent private dining room. Mr. Rossi was already seated at a large, polished mahogany table, a single glass of water before him. He rose as she entered, offering a brief, almost imperceptible nod, but no handshake. His eyes, dark and piercing, held hers for a moment, conveying an intelligence and gravitas that instantly disarmed her. He gestured for her to sit. The air in the room was thick with unspoken weight. Mr. Rossi did not waste time with small talk. His voice was low, calm, yet each word carried an undeniable force. "Mrs. Albright," he began, his gaze unwavering, "your project, the one you've been working on, it will not proceed. Not with our involvement, and not with the involvement of any entity connected to us." Mrs. Albright gasped, her carefully constructed facade momentarily cracking. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Rossi," she stammered. "I don't understand. There must be some mistake. We had very promising discussions. The projections were excellent, the market research." Mr. Rossi raised a hand, a silent command for her to stop. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Albright. The issue is not with your projections, nor your market research. The issue, quite simply, is you." His words, delivered without anger but with absolute conviction, struck her like a physical blow. She felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Never in her life had she been addressed with such stark, unvarnished criticism. "Me?" she questioned, her voice barely a whisper, a mixture of disbelief and burgeoning indignation. "What could I possibly have done?" Mr. Rossi leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Respect, Mrs. Albright. It is a fundamental currency in my world, and you, it seems, are bankrupt." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "I witnessed an incident at your gala several weeks ago. A young girl, a child, extended her hand to you in a gesture of politeness, of simple human connection. Her name was Elena. You looked at her mother, and you dismissed her. You turned your back on her without a word, without acknowledging her presence, her humanity." Mrs. Albright's mind raced, scrambling to recall the incident. Elena, the maid's daughter? Her brow furrowed in confusion. "Mr. Rossi, with all due respect, that was a trivial matter. A child, a maid's daughter. I was busy. I had important guests. It was a misunderstanding, at best. Surely, you cannot be suggesting that a minor social faux pas, if it even was one, could have such profound business implications." She tried to inject a note of dismissive superiority into her voice, but it faltered under his unwavering gaze. Mr. Rossi's expression remained impassive. "Trivial to you, perhaps," he countered, his voice still low. "But to me, it spoke volumes. It revealed a profound lack of respect, a disdain for those you deem beneath you. This is not an isolated incident, Mrs. Albright. Your reputation for treating service staff, and indeed anyone not of your station, with contempt precedes you," he continued, laying bare her behavior with chilling precision. "You believe your wealth, your lineage, gives you license to disregard basic human decency. In my world, that is not merely bad manners, it is a fatal flaw. How can I, or anyone connected to me, trust a person who cannot extend a simple courtesy to a child, who treats those who serve her with such casual dismissiveness? It speaks to a character that is unreliable, untrustworthy, and ultimately, a liability. Such behavior breeds resentment, not loyalty. It creates enemies, not allies." Mrs. Albright sat utterly stunned, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling around her. She had always believed her status afforded her certain liberties, that her wealth insulated her from the consequences of her actions towards those she considered lesser. To be confronted so directly, so coldly, by a man of such immense power, was an experience entirely new and terrifying. She tried to formulate a defense, an excuse, but the words caught in her throat. Then came the ultimatum, delivered with the same quiet finality. "Here is what will happen, Mrs. Albright. You will go to Maria, Elena's mother, and you will apologize. Not a perfunctory apology, not a hollow gesture. A genuine, heartfelt apology to both, Maria and her daughter. You will acknowledge your error, and you will express true regret for your dismissive behavior." Mr. Rossi's eyes bored into hers, leaving no room for doubt. "Until that apology is delivered, and until I am satisfied that it was sincere, every door within my circles, both business and social, will remain closed to you. Your project will remain dormant. Your other ventures will find inexplicable obstacles. You will find yourself isolated. This is not a request, Mrs. Albright. This is an instruction, and it is non-negotiable." He rose from the table, signaling the end of the meeting. "I expect to hear confirmation of your apology by tomorrow afternoon." With that, Mr. Rossi turned and walked out, leaving Mrs. Albright alone in the opulent room, the weight of his words pressing down on her, the full, terrifying realization of her predicament finally sinking in. Her carefully cultivated empire, built on a foundation of entitlement and disdain, was teetering on the brink, and the key to its survival lay in the hands of a maid and her daughter. Mrs. Albright sat motionless for a long time after Mr. Rossi's departure, the silence in the opulent private dining room amplifying the deafening echo of his words. Her mind reeled, a whirlwind of disbelief, indignation, and a chilling, unfamiliar fear. Apologize? To a maid? To a child? The very notion was an affront to everything she believed herself to be. Her pride, a towering edifice built over decades of privilege and unchallenged authority, recoiled violently from the command. The thought of humbling herself before someone she considered so far beneath her was more painful than any business loss she could have imagined. It was a humiliation of the highest order, a direct assault on her identity. Yet, beneath the raging storm of her ego, a cold, hard logic began to assert itself. Mr. Rossi's words, delivered with such quiet confidence, carried the undeniable weight of absolute power. He hadn't just threatened her project, he had threatened her entire world. Every door within my circles, both business and social, will remain closed to you. The implications were terrifying. Without his tacit approval, her carefully constructed network of influence would unravel. Her other ventures, the sources of her vast wealth and social standing, would indeed face inexplicable obstacles. She pictured herself ostracized, her name whispered in hushed tones, her invitations mysteriously unreturned. The thought of social isolation, of being relegated from the pinnacle of society to its forgotten fringes, was a fate worse than any financial ruin. The night that followed was a torment. Mrs. Albright paced the polished floors of her mansion, the vast emptiness of the rooms mirroring the void of her internal struggle. She replayed Mr. Rossi's words, each one a hammer blow against her ingrained arrogance. She tried to rationalize, to find a loophole, a way to circumvent his command without actually performing the act. Perhaps a discreet donation to Maria, an anonymous gift to Elena. But Mr. Rossi had been explicit. A genuine, heartfelt apology. He wasn't asking for a bribe. He was demanding an acknowledgement of her moral failing. He had seen through her, stripped away her pretenses, and exposed the brittle core of her character. By dawn, exhausted and defeated, Mrs. Albright made her decision. The survival of her empire, and indeed her very social existence, depended on this unprecedented act of contrition. The next morning, Mrs. Albright, looking visibly uncomfortable and uncharacteristically disheveled, found herself navigating the unfamiliar streets of a far less affluent neighborhood. She had obtained Maria's address through her assistant, a task that had felt like an expedition into an alien land. Her luxury sedan, usually a symbol of her status, now felt conspicuously out of place parked on the modest street. With a deep, shaky breath, she stepped out of the car, her designer heels clicking softly on the cracked pavement, and approached Maria's modest apartment building. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest, but the memory of Mr. Rossi's unwavering gaze and the chilling finality of his ultimatum propelled her forward. She knocked on the door, a tentative, almost apologetic sound. After a moment, the door opened a crack, revealing Maria's surprised face. Her eyes widened slightly as she recognized her employer standing awkwardly on her doorstep. "Mrs. Albright?" Maria's voice was laced with confusion, a polite question mark hanging in the air. Elena, hearing the commotion, appeared behind her mother, her young face mirroring Maria's surprise, quickly followed by a flicker of wariness. Mrs. Albright swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. This was infinitely harder than she had anticipated. She had rehearsed the words in her head, but now, faced with the quiet dignity of Maria and the innocent, questioning gaze of Elena, they felt hollow, inadequate. She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to meet Maria's eyes. "Maria," she began, her voice a little strained. I've come to apologize." She paused, her gaze shifting to Elena. "Elena, I am deeply sorry for my behavior at the gala. I was wrong not to shake your hand. It was unthinking and incredibly rude of me." The words felt heavy on her tongue, each syllable a concession, a surrender of her cherished pride. She forced herself to continue, addressing Maria directly. "And, Maria, I apologize to you as well for my dismissive attitude, not just that evening, but generally. It was disrespectful, and it was entirely inappropriate. I had no right to treat either of you that way." The apology was not perfect. It was stilted, a little forced, clearly delivered under duress. But it was there, hanging in the air, undeniable. Elena looked up at Mrs. Albright, her expression still a mixture of surprise and caution, but a hint of the earlier hurt seemed to soften in her eyes. Maria, ever gracious, simply nodded. There was no gloating, no triumph in her posture. She understood, perhaps instinctively, the immense effort this apology had cost Mrs. Albright. "Thank you, Mrs. Albright," Maria said quietly, her voice calm and steady. "We accept your apology." It was a simple statement, delivered with quiet dignity, conveying both acceptance and a subtle acknowledgement of the power dynamic that had, for a moment, been dramatically inverted. Mrs. Albright felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation, a faint tremor of something akin to relief mixed with a profound exhaustion. The hardest part was over. Back in his office, Mr. Rossi received the confirmation he had been waiting for. His network, efficient and discreet, had verified that Mrs. Albright had indeed visited Maria's apartment and delivered an apology. The details, including Maria's dignified response, were relayed to him. Mr. Rossi listened impassively, his expression giving nothing away. He simply acknowledged the report with a slow, deliberate nod. The wheels had been set in motion, and the first step of Mrs. Albright's painful education had been completed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the frozen landscape of Mrs. Albright's business dealings began to thaw. The stalled project, her exclusive club or high-end development, started to regain momentum. Calls were returned, meetings were rescheduled, and the elusive investors suddenly became accessible once more. The invisible obstacles that had plagued her vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. Mrs. Albright, though still reeling from the shock of her confrontation with Mr. Rossi, was not unintelligent. She understood the direct correlation between her forced apology and the sudden resurgence of her fortunes. She realized, with a dawning and grudging insight, the immense power Mr. Rossi wielded and the absolute importance of his rules. This wasn't about friendship or even personal liking. It was about understanding a new reality, a fundamental principle of respect that she had foolishly ignored for so long. She hadn't transformed into a benevolent philanthropist overnight, but a seed of understanding, however small, had been planted. The world, as she knew it, had been irrevocably altered, and she, Mrs. Albright, had been forced to learn a lesson she never thought she'd need to. The forced apology, while a bitter pill for Mrs. Albright's immense pride, marked the beginning of a grudging, almost imperceptible process of self-reflection. She didn't undergo a sudden, miraculous transformation into a paragon of empathy, but the experience had undeniably cracked the impenetrable shell of her arrogance. She began to notice subtle shifts in how people interacted with her. The deferential smiles from her staff, once perfunctory, now held a hint of genuine warmth, or perhaps a cautious respect that hadn't been there before. Her business associates, previously wary of her cutting remarks, seemed to engage with her on a slightly more equal footing, their conversations less guarded. It was a slow, arduous process, like watching a glacier melt, but the landscape of her social interactions was undeniably changing. One crisp autumn afternoon, several months after the incident, Mrs. Albright found herself attending a local charity luncheon, an obligation she usually endured with thinly veiled impatience. As she scanned the room, her gaze caught on a familiar face. Elena. The maid's daughter, now a little older, perhaps 11 or 12, was volunteering at a book drive table, her bright eyes alight as she helped younger children select books. Mrs. Albright felt an unexpected pang, a flicker of something she couldn't quite identify. Not guilt, not regret in the traditional sense, but perhaps a nascent understanding of the quiet strength emanating from the girl. This time, instead of averting her gaze or turning away, Mrs. Albright offered a small, almost imperceptible smile. Elena, catching her eye, returned it with a polite, if still slightly guarded, nod. It was a fleeting interaction, but for Mrs. Albright, it was a moment of quiet acknowledgement, a tacit admission that the world was indeed a more complex place than her insulated existence had allowed her to believe. What Mrs. Albright still didn't fully comprehend, however, was the deeper, more intricate web of connections that had truly motivated Mr. Rusi's intervention. His actions weren't solely driven by a universal sense of justice or a general disdain for arrogance. There was a more personal, almost ancestral thread woven into the fabric of his decision. It was a secret history, largely unknown outside a select few. Maria's family, the Rossi family, hailed from a small, sun-drenched village nestled in the foothills of southern Italy. Generations ago, during a time of immense hardship and political upheaval, it was Mr. Rossi's great-grandfather who had extended a crucial lifeline to Maria's ancestors. A desperate plea for help, a promise made in hushed tones, a debt of honor established not with money, but with loyalty and unspoken understanding. Mr. Rossi, a man who valued tradition and family above almost all else, had been raised on these stories. He knew the intricate lineage of the village, the bonds that tied families together for centuries. When he first saw Maria at Mrs. Albright's gala, serving with quiet diligence, something about her demeanor, her resilient spirit, had stirred a distant memory. A casual inquiry, a few discreet calls made through his vast network, and the connection was confirmed. Maria was indeed a descendant of the very family his own had once protected, a family to whom a favor was owed, a courtesy that transcended time and geography. For Mr. Rossi, the incident with Elena wasn't just a display of Mrs. Albright's character flaw. It was a direct affront to a family under his unspoken historical protection. It was a breach of an ancient, honorable understanding, and such breaches, in Mr. Rossi's world, simply could not stand. His intervention was not merely about teaching Mrs. Albright a lesson. It was about honoring a legacy, upholding a silent vow that had been passed down through generations. Years later, the seeds of that intervention bore bountiful fruit, particularly in Elena's life. She flourished, a testament to her innate intelligence and her mother's unwavering support. The incident with Mrs. Albright, though initially painful, had somehow hardened her resolve, instilling in her an even greater determination to succeed. She excelled in school, her natural curiosity leading her to devour books and seek knowledge with an insatiable appetite. She applied for scholarships, her academic record impeccable, her essays infused with a quiet wisdom beyond her years. One particular scholarship, a prestigious and highly competitive award for promising students from underserved communities, arrived with an anonymous benefactor's note. It covered her tuition and living expenses for a top-tier university, and then for medical school. Elena, now a brilliant and compassionate young woman, was well on her way to achieving her dream of becoming a doctor, a dream quietly, anonymously nurtured by the very man who had once championed her dignity. Mr. Rossi, of course, never sought credit. His satisfaction came from seeing justice served and ancient debts honored. Maria continued to work, her hands still busy, but her spirit lighter, her head held higher. She watched Elena thrive, a profound sense of accomplishment radiating from her. She knew her daughter was doing well, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her heart, that sometimes justice did find its way, often through the most unexpected channels, guided by unseen hands. Her quiet dignity, her resilience, had been recognized and respected. And Mrs. Albright? She never became a saint. The ingrained habits of a lifetime, the subtle inflections of condescension, lingered. But she was different. The world had forced her to confront her own reflection, and what she saw had been unsettling. She was now more careful, more measured in her interactions. The sting of Mr. Rossi's ultimatum, the terrifying glimpse into a world where her wealth offered no insulation against consequence, had left an indelible mark. She was more aware of who might be watching, who might be listening, and perhaps, just perhaps, a tiny bit more humble. She understood now, with a chilling clarity, that some lines should not be crossed, that basic human respect was a currency more valuable and far more powerful than any amount of old money or social standing. The lesson, though brutally delivered, had been learned, leaving her forever altered, a woman who now walked with a subtle, newfound awareness of the intricate, interconnected tapestry of human dignity. Years later, the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art shimmered under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, a cascade of muted gold and silver, reflecting off the polished marble floors. Another high society event, another gathering of New York's elite, a scene Mrs. Albright had frequented for decades. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, a living sculpture of refined elegance, her presence still commanding, though perhaps a shade less imperious than in years past. The raw edges of her arrogance had been smoothed, not entirely gone, but softened by the relentless grind of a lesson hard learned. She still carried herself with an air of superiority, but it was now tempered by a cautious awareness, a subtle deference to the unseen forces that governed her world. Her gaze drifted across the room, past the glittering jewels and bespoke suits, and then she paused. Standing by a display of ancient artifacts, engaged in an animated discussion with a prominent art curator, was a young woman. Her posture was confident, her attire sophisticated yet understated, radiating an aura of quiet intelligence and self-possession. Her dark hair was styled elegantly, and her eyes, bright and perceptive, held a familiar spark. It was Elena. No longer the shy, wary child of Maria the Maid, but a poised and accomplished professional, moving effortlessly within these very circles. Mrs. Albright felt a curious jolt, a mixture of surprise and an almost grudging admiration. The transformation was remarkable. Elena was not attending as a guest of someone else. She was here in her own right, her reputation preceding her, perhaps as a rising star in a field Mrs. Albright hadn't bothered to understand, or as a respected patron of the arts, lending her expertise to a cause. A beat passed, and then, driven by an impulse she hadn't anticipated, Mrs. Albright began to move towards Elena. The usual social machinations, the subtle calculations of status and influence, fell away. This felt different. As she approached, Elena concluded her conversation, turning slightly. Her eyes met Mrs. Albright's, and a flicker of recognition, faint but definite, crossed her features. There was no animosity, no lingering resentment, just a quiet acknowledgement of shared history. "Elena," Mrs. Albright began, her voice softer than she intended, a hint of genuine warmth, surprising even herself. She extended her hand, this time with an unhesitating, sincere gesture. "It's good to see you. You've grown into a remarkable young woman." The words felt right, natural, unforced. They carried the weight of years, of lessons learned, of a silent understanding that transcended their past encounter. Elena looked at the outstretched hand, then into Mrs. Albright's eyes. A slight, knowing smile played on her lips, a subtle curve that spoke volumes, of resilience, of dignity, of a quiet victory. She shook Mrs. Albright's hand firmly, her grip confident and steady. "Thank you, Mrs. Albright," she replied. her voice clear and poised. "It's good to see you too." There was no need for further words, no rehashing of old wounds. The handshake, once denied, now offered and accepted, sealed a silent truce, a mutual recognition of the journey they had both undertaken, however disparate their paths. Across the vast, echoing hall, ensconced in a plush armchair, Mr. Rossi observed the interaction. He was older now, his silver hair, a distinguished contrast to his sharp, unyielding eyes. His face, etched with the wisdom of countless battles fought and won, held an almost imperceptible hint of satisfaction. He didn't move, didn't beckon, didn't draw attention to himself. He simply watched, a silent sentinel of justice. The scene before him, the handshake between the once haughty socialite and the now accomplished young woman, was a testament to his quiet power, to the efficacy of his methods. His actions, rooted in a simple, unwavering principle of respect and honor, had indeed left a lasting impact, shaping destinies and altering the very fabric of social interaction within his sphere of influence. A faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval barely disturbed the stillness of his profile. The story of Mrs. Albright, Elena, and Mr. Rossi became, in its own way, a silent legend whispered among those who understood the true currents of power. It was a testament to the idea that true power wasn't solely about the accumulation of money or the wielding of overt influence. It was, fundamentally, about the respect you commanded, and, more profoundly, about the way you treated others, especially those you might deem beneath you. Mrs. Albright had learned this lesson the hard way, stripped bare of her pretenses, and forced to confront the moral vacuum she had created. It had changed her, not into a different person entirely, but into a more circumspect, more aware individual. She understood now that some lines, some fundamental tenets of human decency, should never be crossed. The consequences, as she had discovered, could be far-reaching and utterly devastating to the carefully constructed edifice of one's life. The ripple effect of that single refused handshake, observed by a man who valued honor above all else, had underscored a profound truth. A small act of disrespect, a fleeting moment of arrogance, could trigger a chain of events far beyond one's control or comprehension. And sometimes, in the intricate, often opaque dance of life, justice found its way, not through legal decrees or public condemnation, but through unexpected channels, delivered by the silent, unyielding will of those who understood that true authority lay not in what you owned, but in how you treated your fellow human beings. It was a lesson etched into the foundations of the world, a reminder that even the loftiest towers of privilege could be brought low by the simple, unwavering demand for respect.